So you're ready to start your dog on a carnivore diet, but there's a lot of options out there, and you're not really sure which one is right for you and your dog. In this video, I'm going to discuss the most common diets for your dog and go over the pros and cons of each to help you make an informed decision about which diet is right for your dog. So my name is Jacob, and I started me and my dog on a carnivore diet 5.5 years ago, and it has had profound benefits on both my health and the health of my dog. Now, for me personally, I came from a place of being extremely ill. I was actually on the brink of death, and carnivore saved my life. And I couldn't see myself switching my diet to a carnivore diet and improving my health and not doing the same for my dog, because at the time I was feeding my dog hyper-processed kibble. And I know a lot of people out there can probably relate to that because that is the most common diet on the market today for dogs. So moving into a more species-appropriate diet for your dog, the first one we're going to talk about is the biologically appropriate raw food diet, or the BARF diet. And as an entry-level way of eating for your dog, this is a pretty good option. I have a couple problems with this, which we're going to talk about, but overall, this is way, way better than kibble. And this is actually a diet that your dog could stick with long-term. But again, you have to weigh the pros and cons to make sure that this diet is going to be something that you want your dog to stick with for its entire life. So what the BARF diet consists of is 70% muscle meat, 10% raw meaty bones, 10% vegetables, 5% liver, 5% secreting organs, and 2% nuts and seeds. Now, obviously, this diet does include fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, things like that. It includes plant products. And the reason it does that is because it's mimicking an animal that your dog would consume in the wild. Because the idea is that if your dog consumes, let's say, a rabbit, the rabbit's stomach is going to be full of grains, grass, maybe some fruits, berries, things like that. There's going to be some sort of plant products in the rabbit's stomach. So this diet is meant to mimic that. And there are some benefits to that because it provides a little bit of fiber to your dog's diet. It bulks the stool up some. And if your dog has a hard time secreting anal glands, then it can help those glands secrete essentially. But aside from those benefits, the plant products that are in this food have zero nutritional benefits for your dog. And a lot of people will argue that the dog goes after the animal's stomach first, and people will make the argument that it's because they need the plant products that are in the animal's stomach, but that is actually not the case. The reason it goes for the stomach first is because organs are the most nutrient-dense part of the animal. It is not because they want the grains and the grass and stuff like that. If that was the case, they would be eating that stuff in the wild, which they do not. So that's the main problem that I have with the BARF diet, is that it includes plant products, because there's no biological requirement for plant products in your dog's diet whatsoever. And there are ways for your dog to get fiber outside of plant products, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But overall, since this diet includes muscle meat, raw meaty bones, organs, it is a very good diet. And again, this is one that your dog could actually stick with for its entire life. And a lot of people see very, very good success with this. Just keep in mind that the plant products that are in this diet are not necessary. So you don't really need to include these because your dog is not going to get any nutrition from the plants that you're adding in there. And if your dog does happen to get nutrition from those plants, the bioavailability is going to be very poor, and your dog's digestive system is going to have to work a little harder to extract those nutrients, where it could just get everything it needs from the actual muscle meats, the organs, and things like that. Another benefit to the BARF diet is that it's raw. And a raw diet is going to be the most optimal form of food that your dog can possibly consume. And it also mimics what they would consume in nature. When you cook your dog's food, there is going to be some nutritional loss. You can't get away from that. So by feeding a BARF diet, the food is raw. It's going to be very, very bioavailable. None of the nutrients are going to be degraded in any way, shape, or form. And your dog is going to be able to optimize the nutrition that it is getting from the animal products. Now, the one thing to always consider when we're talking about raw food is food safety. So if you're feeding your dog raw food, make sure you trust the source. Typically, if you're buying your meat from big industry, things from a chain or retail grocery store is going to be less safe than meat from your butcher or meat from a local farm. So just keep that in mind. If there's any question about food safety, I would cook the food, at least slightly, to kill any bad bacteria that might be on there. And that brings us to the next dog diet, which is the species-appropriate carnivore diet. And this is my personal favorite, and the one I recommend to everybody with a dog. And there are several different versions of this diet. And a lot of this just comes down to how you want to structure it. And that's one of the great things about a species-appropriate carnivore diet for your dog, is that you can really adjust and adapt this diet to fit your dog's specific needs. Because no two dogs are alike, Every dog comes from a different background. Every dog has specific requirements. And if you stick with the fundamentals of this diet, you can really dial it in to structure a meal plan that's going to optimize your dog's health. But there is a right way and a wrong way to do a species-appropriate carnivore diet for your dog. The wrong way, and this is something I see a lot more than I should, is just feeding your dog meat. This is not a good idea, and I would highly discourage that for numerous reasons. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there that thrive eating only meat, and I'm one of those people. I can eat steak, I can eat ribeye, I can eat ground beef pretty much every single day, meat, salt, and water, and I feel pretty optimal. But over the long term, and especially for your dog, I do feel like there is a risk of developing nutritional deficiencies. Because again, when you think about your dog and you think about what it would be eating in the wild, your dog is going to be consuming pretty much the entire animal. Not every single meal. One meal it might get a leg, one meal it might get a piece of liver. It's going to be different parts of the animal pretty much every time it eats. But over the period of about a month or two, it's probably going to consume the entire animal over that period. And it's going to be consuming larger and smaller animals as well, whether it's hunting in a pack or hunting by itself, is all going to determine on what it's actually eating. So there's no real such thing as consistent balance in nature, but balance over a period of time is a very real thing. And that is something that if you practice that, then you reduce the risk of your dog developing any kind of nutritional deficiency down to pretty much zero. So if that's you and you're feeding your dog straight muscle meat, hopefully by the end of this video, you'll start to reconsider that and you'll have enough information that justifies why you should include variety in your dog's diet. So the right way to do a species-appropriate carnivore diet for your dog is to balance your dog's meal, is to properly proportion your dog's meal, and to cook it or feed it raw. And there are pros and cons to each. And a very common version of that is the Prey Model Raw Diet, or PMR diet. Now, the PMR diet consists of 75 to 80% muscle meat, 10% raw meaty bone, 5% liver, and 0 to 5% animal-based fiber. And animal-based fiber are things like fur and feathers, which are the forms of fiber that your dog would be getting in the wild. It would not be getting fiber from nuts, plants, berries, seeds, vegetables, things like that. So the PMR diet is a very optimal diet for your dog. And it is a very good model of the prey that your dog would be consuming in the wild. And there are a lot of pros to this version. You have the muscle meat, you have the secreting organs, you have the raw meaty bones, and you have the fiber. The fiber can be very important, again, if your dog has problems going to the bathroom. Maybe your dog has loose or runny stools and it does better with fiber. This is going to be very, very optimal for your dog, most likely. Now, one of the drawbacks to this diet is it might be a little harder to find animal-based fiber, in other words, fur and hair. You usually have to go to a butcher shop or a local producer in order to source that, because in most cases you can't just go to the grocery store and request those types of things. Now, if you hunt and you source your own animals, this is going to be very, very easy for you. And including fiber is going to be a very individualized thing. Some dogs do better with fiber, some dogs don't. So this is one of those instances where you really need to monitor your dog and see what works best for your dog and kind of adjust from there. Now, one of the things that this diet is lacking in is muscular organs, things like hearts, gizzards, lungs. Those can be very, very important in the diet. Those organs have very unique nutrients that cannot be found in ample amounts in other parts of the animal. And in the wild, these organs would be a very important part of your dog's diet. One other area of concern is that the PMR diet recommends 5% liver and 5% other secreting organs. So that's 10% secreting organs. Now, I've found for my dog, she does not handle being fed secreting organs every single day very well at all. She gets loose and runny stools, she gets lethargic, she vomits, she gets actually very, very ill if I include organs too often. And there are quite a few dogs out there that experience this same thing. So this is one of those deals where this can be a very, very good base. But if you land on a PMR diet, you are going to want to really monitor your dog and adjust as needed to make sure you're doing the right thing for your dog and feeding it the foods that are going to be optimal for its health. So a few other ways a species-appropriate carnivore diet can be fed to your dog is just by balancing and proportioning your dog's meals in a way that best suits your dog. And just to give you a few examples, some of the most common ways people do that is 80% muscle meat, 10% raw meaty bones, 5% liver, 5% secreting organs. Another way is 50% muscle meat, 25% muscular organs, 12% raw meaty bones, 5% liver, and 8% other secreting organs. The way I personally structure my dog's meals is 65% muscle meat, usually 50% poultry, 15% red meat, 10% miscellaneous cuts or scraps, 10% muscular organs, 10% raw meaty bones, 3% broth, and 2% secreting organs. Now in any one of those variations, you could also add in animal-based fiber, and you can add and subtract muscle meats, muscular organs, secreting organs, raw meaty bones, until you found a ratio that is optimal for your dog. And if you watch your dog when your dog eats, monitor its weight, the way it goes to the bathroom, its body composition, it's going to tell you visually what is and isn't working for your dog. So based off that information, it's really easy to adjust and pick the foods that are going to be optimal for your dog. And one added benefit of a species-appropriate carnivore diet that includes variation, specifically raw meaty bones, is that those raw meaty bones will really help to clean your dog's teeth, because when you're feeding your dog nothing but just muscle meat, there's nothing abrasive in there that's going to clean your dog's teeth at all, and it really increases the risk of periodontal disease. Some of the key things to keep in mind is just not to overcomplicate things. These formulas and these ratios can be very beneficial when you're starting out, but it is not something that has to be exact every single meal. Like I mentioned earlier, there's no such thing as consistent balance in nature. Balance happens over a period of time, which could be weeks or it could be months. So as long as you're balancing meals and including variety over a period of time, you don't necessarily have to do that every single day. And in a lot of cases, it's probably not optimal to do that every single day. And from my experience, that has been the case. When it comes to food and food products, always consider nutrition, always consider bioavailability, nutrient density, what's in the food, what's not in the food, additives, preservatives, ingredients lists. Is the food a whole natural food? And is this something your dog would be consuming in the wild? These are all considerations that should really help you determine what is and isn't optimal for your dog. Just always remember, the closer it is to nature, the closer it is to mimicking the things your dog would consume in the wild, the better it's going to be. Keep in mind to consider fiber sources. Weigh the pros and cons of vegetable fiber versus animal-based fiber, and consider what you have access to. What kind of raw meaty bones should you be feeding your dog? If your dog has dental issues, should you be feeding raw meaty bones at all? These are all considerations that you should take into account. Consider nutrient loss, cooked versus raw. Is your dog underweight? Is it malnourished? Is it a rescue dog? Does it have problems? If so, you probably want to get into raw feeding as soon as possible so that you can optimize nutrition. If there's a concern with food safety, maybe raw feeding isn't for you right now until you can find a safer source of nutrition. Consider lifestyle. What's sustainable for you? How busy are you? Do you have time to prep food? Consider that when you cook food, you have to debone the bones and you cannot feed the bones. So that's another consideration for time. What's your budget like? Can you afford to feed meat every single day? Do you have access to cheap meat, or is meat in your area very, very expensive? And the breed and the size of your dog is going to weigh in on this, because if you have a 100-pound Rottweiler, that dog is going to consume a lot more food than a Chihuahua. Now, there are definitely ways to save money on a carnivore diet for your dog, and I've done numerous videos about that where I feed my dog on average 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds of meat per day for just over $1 a pound, or about $2 a day. And you can search my channel and find plenty of those videos. And in almost every single case, that is much cheaper than just about every kibble that is on grocery store shelves. And lastly, and most importantly, always monitor your dog and be willing to be flexible and adjust as needed. When it comes to diet and nutrition for your dog, a species-appropriate carnivore diet is always going to be the best option. However, every dog is different, and when it comes to a species-appropriate carnivore diet for your dog, no two dogs are alike. Every dog is going to have specific needs and requirements. Consider your dog's circumstances, consider your circumstances, and choose the path that's right for you and your dog. Your dog can't choose, but your dog does absolutely speak to you. That's why it's very, very important to pay attention to your dog, to monitor your dog, and continue to adjust until you get it right. And I am very confident that the health benefits you're going to see from that are going to be very profound. And it's going to be one of the best things that you've ever done for the health and the longevity of your dog. So if you're ready to make the switch from kibble to carnivore and see your dog's health drastically improve, click on this video right here for my exact 30-day blueprint on how to do that.